All right, hi everyone. I'm Jonathan Shapiro, and I'll be speaking tonight about the writings that are important for helping your student get into the college of their choice. And I just used the chat to say hello and to let you know that if you have questions that come up during the presentation, you can put them in the chat and then I'll go through the chat afterwards. Or of course, thank you. So after the presentation, around 30 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, I'll answer all of the questions. Okie dokie. So let's see. So just a little background about myself. I teach writing and literature at Fordham in the Bronx part-time. I used to be a high school teacher for many years in New York City. And this is where I got my education. So this slide is from last year, 2021. And this has come from NYU's website. And it's just telling us, look at the increase of students who've applied from 2008 to 2021. So it's almost triple the number of students applying, and NYU is not accepting 3 times as many students. So it's important to understand the nature of the competitiveness of kids getting into schools, especially the competitive schools. And it's helpful to understand that the essays are a good way of helping your students stand out. And that's what tonight's talk is about. Some things that going on in the college admissions world today versus 10 years ago is that SAT and ACT are optional for many schools, including many of the elite schools. Though MIT just announced this past week that they are now bringing back the SAT and the ACT. It's not optional for MIT, but a lot of the top schools are keeping it optional. Because the number of applicants is so great, schools more and more are not just looking for the grade intellectual fit to see if the kids are appropriate for their institution, but also the community aspect. Are they a good fit in the community? And the personality of the student becomes important, and the essay is helpful for the admissions folks to get a sense of your student beyond what the activities and the grades are. So the essays become important to helping the student distinguish him or herself from another student who might have the same, say, 3.8, 3.9 and 1,500 scores. How will the school determine who to take? Who do they think they get to know better? Could be very helpful. So the essays are a personal tool of persuasion. It's a rhetorical device. Students get to impact the admissions folks with their own words, and strong essays can help admissions folks get to know and appreciate your student. So this slide and the next slide, the numbering is wrong. These are the common application essay prompts that your student will have to answer one of these. They're from the majority of universities and colleges in the United States. The students apply through the Common App. That's a portal that allows the application to be sent to multiple schools. And you'll see these are the essay prompts for 22, 23. There's also an optional COVID-19 question. This started last year. I suggest that it's your student not make it optional, but fill it out, write that essay for COVID, because the more the student expresses him or herself, the more the colleges get to know them, the better their chances of getting known. That increases their odds of getting in. Now, if you look at the first prompt, so the student has to choose one of these prompts from this slide and that slide. If you look at this first prompt, some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. Now you can see how broad this is, and it's also obviously it's in the personal realm. How personal the student wants to be is up to the student. But I wanted I want parents for you to get a chance to see what your student has to deal with in terms of these prompts. So the student has to choose one of these prompts. The next one, the lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. We kind of tell them when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure, how did it affect you, etc. And these answers can only be 650 words. And that brevity, relative brevity, is a challenge, just because it's not a lot of words and you want to cover a lot of ground in that short amount of space. Now, these are the other prompts. The last prompt, share an essay on any topic of your choice. It could be one you've already written, or that.
I don't care.
But I don't recommend.
You have to do that.
No, I don't.
Can you mute your mic, please? I don't recommend students regurgitate an essay they've already written. Most high school students are not strong writers to begin with, and most of the essays they write for school are, they're usually not that impressive, and they may not tell the school a lot about your child. If the student hands in an essay about Hamlet, I don't know how much the schools can be learning about that student in terms of their personality. Again, 650 words max. So the personal statement, students have to write about themselves. The more student knows themselves, the better. Some students have trouble articulating what they feel and even what they think about topics and about themselves. So that's one particular challenge that comes up for these essays. They also need to develop a so what about their experience. It's not enough to say, well, I went away from camp and saved someone's life who was drowning, which would be great. But they need to develop, well, so what about that? And students struggle often with articulating the deeper meaning of their experience. They're just not used to it yet. And I teach college, and my college students aren't used to it. The writing should not be generic. In other words, it shouldn't be, the writing should be that we can identify student A from student B, from Joe to Jane. And even if Joe and Jane have had the same experience, Joe's perspective and his particular experience would be different than Jane's. Even if, say, they both missed the subway and they were late for school. Their essays should still be able to help us understand one from the other by their own uniqueness. And that's one of the things I'll be talking about, is how do you help yourself in the writing show who you are in your particular point of view and your particular uniqueness. The essay is not a 5-paragraph essay in terms of what the students are usually used to. Students are trained to write arguments and analyses in English classes and in history classes. And so they're not used to writing narratives, and they're not used to writing about themselves. So narrative skills, as in telling a story, are important for this genre, for the college application essays, and students are usually not practiced in it or not skilled in it. Students are not usually sure how to organize their response for a 650 prompt to write about themselves. So that's a challenge for students. And again, narrative skills, as in how to tell a story, can be very helpful. So just some tips from the very beginning. I would encourage if all the students or the parents who are here tonight, if your students are going to be applying to school in the coming year, to go online and read personal statements. The college office of Brooklyn Tech should have old essays that students could read. There are plenty online. So the students should get familiar with the models and the genre. They need to pay attention to how the essay is written, as well as the what, the theme. The structure is part of the craft. And they should give themselves a lot of time to write this essay. I usually suggest 15 sitting hours of work to make it really strong. That, from brainstorming, picking a topic, to drafting it, to revising it, drafting again, revising it again, and then the editing, and then the showing it and sharing it. And there's probably going to be more from there. So as a language guy, I'm into language and the power of language and the challenge of language. These essays, particularly interesting for me, is because like with all writing, is how do we move people to feel in language alone? Your student is not going to be talking to the people in person when they're with this essay. They're going to be having to make an impression just by their language alone. Disembodied text is the academic term for that. It's just text. It's not, there's no gesticulation, there's no tone of voice in terms of the student reading the essay. So that's a challenge. The particular challenge for young writers or people who are in school is that they're used to writing abstractly about ideas. And while ideas are important to this essay, it's not an intellectual argument. Again, it's a personal narrative. It's sharing feelings. It's showing a scene. It's talking about likes and dislikes and hurts and loves. So that's not something a usual kind of writing that students are used to, which involves language at a different level, as well as an internal investigation that is different. So that means that risk-taking, and not sharking, but sharing is important. Sharing as in, here's what I feel and think. A mature perspective becomes very important in this, as in, I'm no longer just a young adolescent. I'm now going to be ready to leave home for many students and live on my own and be able to take part in the community as an intellectual contributor and build community. So colleges want to see students who are matured or maturing and have learned things, not just in the classroom. So one of the, what I'm calling the curse of academic writing, which is that most academic writing is based on ideas, and ideas are abstract. And that by abstract, like the word heavy is abstract. Heavy for me could be different than heavy for Cynthia and Jason. I could feel overweight and someone else could say, no, you're not overweight, I feel heavy. Now, heavy could also mean emotionally heavy. So if a student writes about heavy and uses heavy, it's not clear what the student is referring to unless they're specific. And most students tend to not be used to writing specifically, just like they might not be specific in talking about themselves, they're not used to writing specifically about themselves. And that's a problem if you want to have your readers be affected in a positive way, to be moved. So the diction of the head versus the heart is what I've been talking about. Diction is just the words we use, the word choices we make. The abstract words of heavy are not going to move readers because of their nature of that vagueness. And students need to be aware of this, and most are not. So this is one thing that is a good takeaway for tonight, is to have students' consciousness be piqued to understand that their language that they're using, some are more effective to help us feel than others. Now, this is an example of a student who I helped many years ago. And she came to my office. I was living in Seattle at the time, and she told me she lost 60 pounds. So her essay was about being heavy. But look how she conveys heavy. This is a very impressive use of simple language to paint a picture. It's imagery, and this helps the reader feel. 1, 2, 3, suck, my mom said, we almost have it. I was trying with all my might to squeeze into what should have been my homecoming dress. It was a perfect dress, light blue, sparkles, everything I ever wanted. As my face turned red from holding my breath, my mom suddenly stopped pulling at the back zipper, looked at me and said, it's just too small. Now, it's just too small is the dialogue that helps us understand that the girl couldn't get the dress over her shoulders. Then that tells us, without the girl ever saying it, that she was heavy. And that also, and I've been sharing this this scene with people for many years now, it also makes me sad. And that's in that emotional response that I have tells me that the writing's effective, and that because I can feel, that means that the writing's doing its job. Because if you can imagine, this is an admissions person reading this and they feel, oh, wow, that's sad, then that person who wrote this essay will stand out in the person's memory, and the admissions folks will say, hey, let's look at the student, because they've affected, the writing itself has affected the readers, and this is what you want. Now, notice the language is simple, and it's very specific, And therefore, it's what I'm calling imagery. It paints a picture, visual, and there's no abstractions. There's no idea there. And this is the kind of writing that students are not used to and can be very helpful for them using to a good degree, not all the time in the essay, but a good degree. Again, the job is to help the admissions folks get to know your student. And if they get to experience something the student has that they can feel, in this case, sad, then you're moved, and then your student has a leg up on someone else who might be vying for the same spot. So imagery is useful because it helps college admissions folks to feel and get to know you, the student. Imagery, naming is very important. That's where students are specific. They say, like, the park by my house. If the student writes about the park by the house and never says the park's name, we miss out on a lot of information about the student and their experience. Prospect Park is different than Central Park. There's a certain personality of Prospect Park, and what it conveys, it's different, say, from Central Park. And the student would be smart whenever they're mentioning something to name it. It plants the reader and it conveys personality and voice. Specificity is very important. It could be I was overweight as a child versus I weighed 200 pounds in 10th grade. The 200 pounds is going to help people remember, and that's because it's specific. And these three things, imagery, naming, specificity, help readers feel. And if you do that, you're helping your student, the students helping themselves get attended to. Abstract words like heavy don't elicit any emotion, and therefore they're not effective in terms of helping the reader feel. Now, I'm going to contradict everything I just said on the next slide. It's not enough just to be showing specifics in terms of a scene, as in I couldn't get the dress to fit. Students also need to comment on their experience, and that language is not necessarily imagistic, but it's showing the student has a perspective, a point of view. And if the student lacks sharing a point of view on their experience, they're not going to be as seen as matured, or they're not going to show their thinking. So on the one hand, students need to use writing that's going to move people to feel. On the other hand, they need to use language that shows their thinking and their perspective on their experiences. So it's not enough just to say something happened. It's vital to say what you think about what has happened. To say, well, I used to think blah, 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 and now after going through whatever, I now understand blah, 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 blah. That's very, very important. And students need to be able to step back and say, here, reader, I'm going to tell you what's important about this experience. This is a student who got into Stanford and Princeton and Harvard. Very strong student. I helped come years ago. And the only reason I'm mentioning this is that her essay was about being a pure sexuality educator. And this slide shows how she thinks. After she created a scene with imagery and helped us, moved us, she then talks about her opinion, and she's very clear on what she thinks. And I'll just read a little bit about it. I'm a pure sexuality educator because I want my students to know that while physical challenges of puberty are prescribed, only we can, I can't see it because of the, only we can determine how we view ourselves and how we let others treat us. To all the Peter Pan people in my classroom, I demonstrate the development and growing up don't have to coincide. Puberty has its own internal clock, and she goes on. Growing up is not a linear chain. Sometimes we want to be independent. What it becomes clear is that the student has something to say, which can be challenging for young people. Often they're used to following instructions, being a good student. But being a good student doesn't mean just passively accepting what things are told to them. They need, and especially the colleges, they want to see, can so-and-so chime in class about something? Can they share their opinion? It's very important for students to start developing their thinking about experiences in the classroom, outside the classroom. This student is demonstrating through her commentary, she has a point of view. So a mature point of view is very important for these essays. Often what happens is that people get nervous, and understandably so, and they feel that they have to kind of talk about themselves and all their great accomplishments. Like your students go to an excellent school, Brooklyn Tech, and they're taking all these challenging classes, and they're probably involved in a lot of clubs and robotics and whatever. But this essay is not a resume. It's not a time for the students to talk about all the stuff they've done. That is not what this is for. This essay is to help the colleges get to know the student in a personal way, their personality, not their achievements, more about what they think and feel, what their viewpoints are. So the story needs to be deep, not broad. It's not a resume. You need to establish some story, one narrative thread, and the students should show their thinking and feeling through commentary, reflection, along with the narrative. So just a reminder, this is not a time for the student to be dumping in all their great accomplishments. That's not this essay. In terms of the essay's importance, the student needs to tease out a so what. This can be very challenging in terms of, well, so what? What's important about what I've experienced? And this is something that just needs to be teased out. The so what should be easy to identify. Eventually, students usually don't know why they're talking about what they want to write about. Eventually, over time, it comes out. That's why I encourage students to start early on this essay and to give themselves time to develop it as they're developing their thinking about their experience. Some themes, common themes: self-image, identity, maturation, confidence, understanding, acceptance of self, others, and of course, there could be many, many more. So the gist so far for tonight that I'd like you to take away with is that the how of the essay is as important, or sometimes is more important than the what. In other words, the how the essay is written, how it's told, is more important than the what that is said. And I'll show you in the next slide what I mean by that more clearly. Imagery naming and, I can't read that word, help create voice and share the personality. Commentary shows a matured perspective. So some parents especially, and who are interested in their students, interested in the students' well-being, and they're nervous, well, my student hasn't done some extraordinary things, or they have to have done something awesome. And that's not true. And for example, this student I had, she was scuba diving and she almost died, very dramatic, but really couldn't talk about it. So this essay couldn't work. This student wrote about shaving. And for this student, who was a funny guy, it was a rite of passage. It was a time of maturation. And it was a very, very strong essay. So on the one hand, something very ordinary, shaving, could be outstanding, depending on how it's written. And someone who almost died scuba diving can have a terrible essay because the student doesn't know what they want to say about it. My point that I'd like you again to take home for tonight is that you don't need an extraordinary topic. Any topic, if the student is into it, can work. And the most important thing is the student wants to write what the student wants to write. And again, but the craft of it can come into play tremendously. If the student doesn't write it well, then it's not going to be effective. That goes for either a mundane topic or a dramatic topic. Something else that can happen is that people change their topics midstream. I helped a student, and she had written about ADHD and her problems focusing, and we met and we were talking, and she wasn't into it. She felt, well, I really don't want to write this, but my school counselor said I should. And then we talked, and she ended up changing the essay, and it became much better, and she was really into it. And this is just a note from her mom. The reason I'm sharing this is that it's okay to change your mind. And again, parents of your student, you want to encourage your student to start this essay early. But I suggest they start over the summer, between junior and senior year, and give themselves the summer to write it. Because A, the stakes are high, and B, it's an evolution, it's a discovery, and these things take time to suss out. Also, there's a lot of pressure on this whole process with college admissions, as you're aware, and the student usually feels that, and that adds difficulty in the writing, and that could just slow things down. And some people even write more than one essay just because they want to see which one is better. So one of the things that is very important is choosing a topic. That's going to come from the prompts that I showed you in the beginning of the presentation. Just some do's and don'ts. I think it's important that students write about what they want to write about, not what they think they should write. I think too often people strategize over, well, what would the colleges like to hear? And they spend a lot of energy thinking that out rather than saying, well, what do I want to tell them about myself? The latter is stronger because it's coming from a place of wanting to share, and the writing will be reflected in that genuineness. It's important for the student not to write generically. That means too broadly. That means without specific details, without uniqueness. It's okay to write about difficult issues. Some people I've helped over the years have written about, say, a loss or a divorce or some mental, emotional challenges or physical challenges. If the student wants to write about that, that's fine. That depends on the student. One thing they should not do is stay only in their childhood experience. I've had students who want to write about when they were in elementary school, but the student is not applying as an elementary school student. The student needs to show maturation, so they need to get out of that childhood only time. They should be genuine, and they should try not to overthink. These are things, it's sometimes harder, easier said than done. A student hopefully should trust themselves, take risks, explore, again, be specific, and have time to develop their thinking and sharing, reflect, show. They want to show some sophistication in terms of their perspective, that they can see multiplicities, see paradoxes, if that comes into play. So this now, I'm going to shift gears. This is no longer about the Common App personal statement. This is about the individual essays that most colleges require. For example, NYU is going to require, I think it's 2 essays just for the NYU, just for students who get into NYU, on top of the personal statement that the college app requires. So NYU, say, it's going to get 3 essays. The main essay, the personal statement, and then their supplements. So, Columbia, NYU, you name them, all these schools have their own required essays on top of the personal statement, the Common App. And these essays are very important to help the schools determine if the student is a good fit for their college. And the students need to spend the time researching the college, the university, and determining what in particular about that program the student is interested in. They should not tell the school how great the school is. That's not helpful. They should say why the school is great for that student. Hopefully the students get to visit the school before writing these. It'll help them because they'll have a sense of the culture and the people and the campus. I just wanted to share, this is from University of Chicago. These are their required essays. So again, the University of Chicago is going to require the kids to hand in their own personal statement, and then they have to answer this one. How does the University of Chicago satisfy your desire for a particular kind of learning community in future? Please address with some specificity your own wishes on how they relate to U Chicago. So this is one, and then they have to do another one. And now look at this option, essay 1. What if the moon were made of cheese or Neptune made of soap? Pick a celestial object, reimagine its material composition, and explore the implications. Feel free to explore the realms of physics, philosophy, fantasy. The sky's the limit. University of Chicago is famous for its imaginative prompts. Now, I find these to be fun. Some students I helped over the years, they freak out. It plays in a sense of into a realm of imagination, or it makes them uncomfortable. Then that's helpful for the student to know, well, maybe Chicago's not a good fit for me. Chicago is going to want a certain person who's very comfortable with themselves and their thinking and feeling, and they make that apparent in this essay option. The important thing for your student to know is that they need to research why Chicago is good for them. And so they need to figure out what it is, in this case, about Chicago that is exciting for them. And what's exciting about Chicago is going to be different than what's exciting for going, say, to Columbia. The student should be very wary of just regurgitating the same kind of response. There's some play with that, but you need to let Chicago know, if you're really interested in Chicago, that you're really interested in Chicago for what it offers and not just any good school. Now, for these essays, the supplements, let's say for University of Chicago, it's really important that the student does not teach, whine, preach, or tell. In other words, tell us about Chicago. You don't want to tell them about University of Chicago. they know Chicago. What they don't know is what you, the student, thinks about Chicago and why you want to go there. That means it's a sharing. Oh, I loved Chicago when I saw this. I spoke to this person, this department office, blah, blah, blah. I'm really excited. Notice I'm using I and feeling. It's a share. If they start teaching, whining, preaching, they're going to turn off the reader. It's really important for these elite schools for the student to show their passion, enthusiasm. It's part of Harvard's secret sauce of admissions. They want to see people who are really psyched to be, who are invested in their education and who are passionate about learning. And all these schools care about, they want students to be able to be excited to be going there. So this comes from a student I helped. He went to Stuyvesant a couple of years ago. And this was for Harvard in his supplement. And he wrote initially, due to the workload from my school, this is prompt this Harvard wanted to know what he did over the summer. And he said, due to the workload from my school and extracurricular commitments, I don't have much time to work on improving my violin technique during the school year. I find it frustrating that I can't pick up new pieces. If you notice, he's complaining. And just like you wouldn't complain in a job interview, you shouldn't complain in a college application to Harvard, yet alone any school. This is a tonal issue, and students are often not aware of tone. He's conveying a whine, he's complaining. So he should, and he did, he revised it. Now, this is in his revision. I love playing the violin. I participate in orchestras, chamber music groups, and perform solo works. The enthusiasm is there, and that's what's important. And he's still sharing what he does, but he's not coming off as whining. I'm sharing this slide because it's an advanced, it's advancing the premise. My argument to you is that tone matters. And excuse me, this is a tonally positive piece. Now, in the Common App essay, the personal statement, there could be times the student is sad if they're writing about something sad, or it's not like I want people to always be optimistic, but it's very important to show enthusiasm on the individual supplements, which are less personal and more academic and activity oriented than the personal narratives. So here's just some questions regarding the process. My student writes essay all the time. What's the big deal? The big deal is, in some ways, it's not a big deal. Yes, it's just writing, and kids know they write, but the stakes are higher than ever, and the essays help the kids stand out in a way that could make a big difference. Also, what's big deal about it is they're not used to writing narratives or about themselves. I suggest, again, I'm repeating myself, that the student gives themselves a summer to write. When I work individually with students, I estimate 15 hours of face time together. I suggest students start their essay in July of the summer between junior and senior year. They finish the main essay, and then they work on the early action, early decision essays, and then they can go to the rest. If your student doesn't know what to write about, that's fine. You can just brainstorm. Reading other essays will be helpful. I give my students a worksheet to help them suss that out. If your student hasn't created a company or saved endangered species, in other words, my student is just a good student, a good kid, hasn't done anything outstanding, or she outstanding yet, it doesn't have to be. Remember, the student wrote about shaving. It doesn't have to be a sexy topic. My student will not let me read the essay. If your student is shy about sharing, that's fine. Just make sure an adult, not just a kid's friend, but someone who's been around the planet, say 30, 40 years, and is a good reader, reads this essay or essays. You want to have an experienced reader read it. Use the students should use English teacher and college office. Sometimes this will happen where students hear from one person the essay is fine and from another it's not. It can be confusing. My 5 cents in this is to empower the student to make a decision who he wants to listen to. Sometimes these essays go through a lot of eyes. It depends on the family and on the school. So you want to empower your student to say, okay, I like what so-and-so said, and the other person, thank you, no thank you. If my student's a great writer, doesn't need help, that's awesome. I just, again, the college office person at least should see the essay and have an adult reader look it over just to make sure. The supplements we talked about, those are the essays required for the individual schools. Those are very important and need to be attended to. The student should use English teacher in the college office. And now we're almost done. So just to recap, the Common App, as you saw, 7 prompts, 650 words max. There's a COVID question, 250 words. They should do it. The more this colleges know about the kids, the better. Early decision, early action, November 1st, sometimes earlier, October 15th. Early action is not binding. Early decision is binding. There's also early decision 2, which is later in the year. And the students can do that if they don't get in with the early decision 1. Most regular admissions deadlines, December, January. Again, supplemental essays for each school, not all, but most. And ideally, students should visit, and also ideally, they should interview with admissions persons. And they could directly go to the schools they're applying to get that, to look into that, to book a time. And just to reinforce the importance of these essays, this is from a mom whose student I helped. Kate got a handwritten note from the regional admissions office from Stanford, which said, I read your essays 3 times, which I don't have time to do. You're so passionate about your beliefs, I knew we had to take you halfway. So this just I want to share this to remind you that the essays can make a difference. They may, it's no guarantee, of course, but you want to encourage your students to really take it seriously. It's really, it's probably the most important writing they've done, where the reading is real, the audience is real, and the impact can be great. And I think that's it. Thank you. This is Jonathan. This is how you can reach me if you're interested. And I'm having this IVSA coaching is my website. I have another one as well, newyorkwriting.com. And I'm happy to take any questions. If you have a verbal question, please unmute. And if you have a written question, you can put it into the chat. Fran, you could reach out to me at my email here, or you can text me or call me here.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
When you talk about creating like an overall or arcing like theme or life lesson in your essay, should you directly state it in some ways at the end, or should it be more like a general inference for the reader to?
You don't want to be inferring on this type of writing. You want to be explicit. So, like for the student in the slide in the beginning of the presentation, the student who wrote about her dress not fitting, she then explicitly talks about how her esteem, her sense of self was low initially because of her weight, how she felt less confident in school, and then she detailed how she started to lose the weight and how her physical body and, more importantly, her emotional state changed and how she grew more confident. And we see that, and we go on that journey with her. There's not any confusion or doubt what the essay is about. It's really important for the reader for you to be clear, so the reader is clear. It should be like simple. My essay is about X. It doesn't need to be complicated. On one, it's like this essay is about a student losing weight, but it's much more than that. It's about gaining self-esteem. It's about gaining pride in oneself. It's about seeing someone overcome an obstacle. But you don't want to be ambiguous. There's no advantage of being big. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure. Marion, for supplemental essays, when researching universities, many students have already written about the specifics, such as how professors research, so it's hard to find something different than anyone. And it's just on how to do the research on the schools besides the school websites. Well, the professor's research what's important is not the research that the professor does, but what your student has to say, or what's interesting for your student about the research. So you could have 15 people talk about the same professor's research, and you could ostensibly have 15 different responses to what's cool about that research. That's the student sharing what the student feels there and what they're excited about. And that's really important. And then it's also important because it shows the school that the student is serious about doing potential work with that professor at that institution. So it's specific to the school, and it's more important, or as importantly, it's specific about the student's interest. Students in visiting the campus, they could sit in on classes. They can talk to people. They can go to, potentially they could have a potential sit down with the prof. So that's another way of getting interested in the school, or showing particular interest in the school. You don't need, the websites are important for sure. The faculty have their websites as well. And these major institutions, the faculty will have their work up and students can find out about that work. They can email faculty. So there's a lot of ways to really to get particular about a school and the research and the teaching that's going on there. Was that helpful, Marianne, I hope? Question, Vito?
Thank you so much, Jonathan. You have up there, obviously you do this on a one-to-one basis. It wouldn't be fair to the audience if you didn't tell us kind of what your fee structure was, and do you have something for our free and reduced lunch kids, a sliding scale?
I have different packages I offer families. I offer a package that's just to help with the main essay, for the Common App essay. And then I have a package to help with that essay and the supplements. And the rate, there's some flexibility in the rate. I haven't settled on a rate for this year yet. And I'd rather not say what it is because I don't want to lock myself in. My hourly rate, I'll tell you, is usually $2.50 an hour. The college app essay world is kind of crazy what people charge. $2.50 an hour is not cheap by any means. I know people charge over $1,000 an hour for this stuff, and I'm sure that people charge a lot less. So if you or anyone else is interested, please let's talk, and I'll tell you. I have to figure out what my fees. I'm honestly going to do some adjustments with my fees. I don't want to say what they are right now without other than my hourly rate is that okay. I'm clear on.
Well, would you give some consideration or think about giving some consideration to kids with free reduced lunch?
Yeah, I was a public school teacher for 10 years, working with a school of 99% free lunch. I know about that, and yes, I would. And it's also, I'm open to doing it's not as effective. I used to teach small groups, and because of the nature of this work is really individual, I prefer now just to work one-on-one. But if you, or if there's someone listening and you and your friends want to get together, small groups, say 3 or 4 kids, it will be cheaper and it could be as effective, but it's a little less effective than the one-on-one, just because one-on-one lends itself to an intimacy that small groups, it's not as intimate. And the reason I'm mentioning that is that this essay is personal, and some kids might be shy, and I have to do a lot of listening, a lot of digging to get kids to open up sometimes. A lot of my work is really helping kids open up. And in a smaller group, it can happen, but some kids, it's not as effective.
Maybe a group of friends.
Huh?
Maybe a group of friends that are already formed.
Yeah. It depends on where the student's at and what's going on, what they might want to write about. But as you know, kids carry a lot of stuff sometimes. And what they might want to share, they don't maybe want to share in front of others. It depends.
Mm-hmm. And a follow-up question, Jonathan, thank you. A follow-up question is, we see all this, you mentioned $1,000 an hour for some of these people. We know what happened with the scandal a couple of years ago. Do colleges have checks and balances in place that they know who just paid for someone like you or someone with not scruples, because you probably have scruples, but someone without scruples who just writes the essay for the kid?
No, there's
some kid who does it.
As far as I know, there's nothing where a student has to sign, I wrote this all by myself or anything like that. I haven't seen that yet. I think it'd be smart.
Yeah.
But just like kids get math tutor or they get tutored in, I was an English. Most schools don't require the student to say how they got helped in something. But the reality, and it's not a dodge, but the reality is all writing goes through multiple viewings. Anything published is going to go through editing. It's never just one writer in isolation, never, in terms of what's being shared. And so my philosophy, and when I'm doing my work well, I'm just a catalyst. I'm helping the kids articulate what they might struggle articulate. I'm giving them platforms of writing. But I still, I help students write more clearly than if they were writing on their own. And I'm sure that's part of the nature of being a writing coach. But it's a delicate balance. I don't write for the student, but I help them write better.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan.
You're welcome. Yeah, follow up if you have interest in a small group, and I'm open to that. It could be very fun.
I can facilitate kids getting it together, not for my kids, for other kids.
Yeah, yeah. I used to do it. I was doing it for Stuyvesant for a couple of years. I just, what happened, and some parents got a little grumpy with me, and it's not. It can be high stakes, and parents get stressed, and it's clearer for me one-on-one. I know there's no like, okay, I gave it my all. If they don't get in, they don't get in. In the small group, it could be a little more slippery, just an FYI.
Thank you, sir.
Other questions? Any specific, yeah.
So the essay, the limit is 650 words, but how long would you say is the average essay?
650 words. Most students overwrite, and I encourage my students to overwrite initially, and then they go back and they edit it down to 650. 650 is not a lot, and you shouldn't be thinking ideally. It's about quality. And in order to talk about yourself in a way that's going to move readers, you want to use all the space you have. Jeff, did you have a question? Am I missing something? Any specific experience or recommendations for essays for competitive STEM schools? Well, the STEM schools like MIT, I help students apply to MIT, for example. They're still going to require the personal narrative, the personal statement from the Common App, and they're going to have their particular questions. And those STEM schools are not going to be, Chicago is an excellent school for STEM as well. They're not going to be asking kids to show their science or math knowledge necessarily, but they are going to want to know their area of particular interest, say comp sci, like Columbia. I've helped students, many students apply to Columbia, comp sci or medicine. They're going to want to say, how are we going to use Columbia, for example, or Chicago or MIT to further your interest? The more your STEM student can particularize his or her interests, the better. This goes back to the beginning of the talk. The more they know themselves, the more they say, I'm really excited when I do blah, blah, blah. And they have if they're coding, what are you coding for? What's your goal? How do you want to help people? It's not you. So the more the student can show a personality that's invested in some kind of significant work, the better. Oh, you're welcome, Marianne. Rachel, I heard from a writer's family that the tutor they hired to help their son transfer from word bar to change his writing voice and clear to following and lots of adjectives. And Rachel, I think, there's a lot of aesthetic. Your question's about aesthetics, and it's about what preferences are. I have my preferences. I write, I'm a writer, I write poetry. I like clear, I like simple, and I like imagery, and I like to feel, and I like writing that's going to help people feel. And I think those things lend themselves very well to this process for the college essays, because persuasion happens less in the heart and more in the head. And the writing that's clear, that's going to move people, is persuasive. Flowery language and lots of adjectives could be over. For me personally, I would find that to be annoying. And so that wouldn't be my shtick. But someone else, so it's different strokes, different folks to some degree. This is not math in terms of the clarity of how to get to an answer. I hope that helps. Other questions? Other questions? Other questions? Is that it? Okay. Well, thank you for your time. I hope this was helpful, and enjoy your night.